My name is Aidan Fletcher, 72 years old, and I never thought I'd have to kick my own son out of the house I built with these hands. For 45 years, I poured my soul into that two-story colonial on Maple Drive. I gave Thomas and his wife Jessica a place to stay when times got tough. But when my boy screamed that I shouldn't argue with his wife in her house, something inside me broke. Before you judge me, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button while I tell you how I reclaimed what was mine. I spent my entire working life as a construction contractor here in Pennsylvania. Started as a carpenter's apprentice at 16 and worked my way up until I had my own business by 30. The crowning achievement of my career wasn't some fancy hotel or office building in Philadelphia. It was the two-story colonial I built for my family on Maple Drive with my own two hands. Every nail, every board, every inch of that house has my sweat soaked into it. I designed the floor plan myself, spent weekends and evenings after work laying the foundation, framing the walls, installing the hardwood floors my late wife Elaine loved so much. I remember the pride I felt when we finally moved in, Elaine 7 months pregnant with our boy Thomas. Those early years were the happiest of my life. Elaine made that house a home, filling it with warmth and laughter. Thomas took his first steps in the living room, said his first words in the kitchen we used to gather in every evening. The three of us were a perfect little family in our perfect little house. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. When Thomas turned 12, Elaine was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer. Within 6 months, she was gone, leaving me to raise our son alone. I was devastated, completely lost without her, but I had Thomas to think about. That boy became my entire world, my reason for getting out of bed in the morning. Raising a teenage boy as a single father wasn't easy, especially while running my own business. But Thomas and I developed a special bond through those difficult years. On weekends, we'd work on house projects together. I taught him how to use my tools, how to fix things, how to take pride in creating something with his hands. Looking back, I think those projects were therapy for both of us, a way to feel close to Elaine while moving forward with our lives. Thomas was a good kid. Hardworking, respectful, appreciative of the sacrifices I made for him. He never gave me the kind of trouble other single parents complained about with their teenagers. He got decent grades, played baseball, helped around the house without too much complaining. I was proud of the young man he was becoming, confident that Elaine would have been proud too. After high school, Thomas went to community college, then transferred to Penn State for business. I paid for his education, happy to give him opportunities I never had. When he graduated and got an entry-level job at a marketing firm in Philadelphia, I couldn't have been prouder. My boy was making something of himself. For about 10 years, things were great between us. Thomas would come over for Sunday dinners, help me with maintenance around the house, call regularly just to check in. He dated here and there, but nothing serious. I was starting to wonder if he'd ever settle down when Jessica entered the picture 6 years ago. I still remember the first time he brought her over for dinner. She was attractive in a high-maintenance sort of way. Blonde hair, perfectly styled, nails done, designer clothes. She seemed nice enough, laughing at my dad jokes, complimenting my cooking, asking about family photos on the wall, but something about her felt off to me. There was a calculation behind her smile, an assessment in her eyes as she looked around my home. "Your house is just charming, Mr. Fletcher," she said in a tone that suggested it was quaint but outdated. "I can see so much potential here." Thomas was clearly smitten, hanging on her every word, looking at her like she was the sun and moon combined. I kept my reservations to myself. My son was 42, old enough to make his own decisions about who to date. Their romance was a whirlwind. Within 3 months, Thomas was talking marriage. When he brought Jessica over to announce their engagement, I offered my congratulations while gently suggesting they might want to date a bit longer before taking such a big step. "When you know, Dad," Thomas said, squeezing Jessica's hand. "We don't want to waste any more time. We're not getting any younger," Jessica added with a little laugh, though she couldn't have been more than 35. "And I've always dreamed of having a family." They married 6 months later at an expensive venue Jessica selected. I wrote a check for $20,000 as my contribution, significantly more than I could comfortably afford on my retirement income, but I wanted to support my son's happiness. The wedding was elaborate, nothing like the simple ceremony Elaine and I had shared, but Thomas seemed happy, and that's what mattered. Almost immediately after the wedding, I noticed changes in Thomas. He called less frequently. When he did visit, he seemed distracted, checking his phone constantly, mentioning they needed to leave early because Jessica had plans. He became less independent, always checking with her before making any decision. "I need to talk to Jess about that," became his standard response to almost any question. 2 years after they married, Thomas called with news. He and Jessica were struggling financially. The marketing firm had downsized, and Thomas had been laid off. Jessica's job as an administrative assistant at a law firm wasn't enough to cover their apartment rent and her student loans. They were considering moving to a cheaper city. "Why don't you stay with me for a while?" I offered without hesitation. "The house is too big for just me anyway. You can save up until Thomas finds a new position." There was a pause on the line. Then Thomas said Jessica was on the other extension. "That's so generous, Aidan," she said, using my first name despite my never inviting her to do so. "We wouldn't want to impose, though." "Nonsense," I replied. "It's just temporary, until you get back on your feet. The house has 4 bedrooms. There's plenty of space for everyone." And so began what was supposed to be a temporary arrangement. I was actually excited about the company. Since retiring from contracting 5 years earlier, the house had felt increasingly empty. Having my son back home would be nice, I thought. We could work on projects together like old times. For the first month, everything was fine. Thomas and Jessica took the master bedroom suite I'd added to the first floor a decade earlier, when I started thinking about aging in place. I moved upstairs to the bedroom that had been mine when Elaine was alive. Jessica cooked elaborate meals, Thomas helped with yard work, and we settled into a routine that seemed pleasant enough. But small things began to change. Jessica started rearranging furniture without asking, claiming she was just freshening things up. Family photos of Elaine, Thomas, and me disappeared from the living room walls, replaced by abstract art pieces Jessica brought from their apartment. When I asked about the photos, she said they were safely stored in a box in the garage, adding that the new art better matched her vision for the space. The kitchen, which had always been my domain since Elaine's death, gradually became Jessica's territory. My cast-iron skillets that had been seasoned over decades disappeared, replaced by non-stick cookware she ordered online. My favorite coffee mug somehow got broken, and the specific brand of coffee I'd been drinking for years was replaced by an expensive organic blend Jessica preferred. "Just trying to help you eat healthier, Aidan," she said when I mentioned missing my regular breakfast foods. "Men your age need to watch their cholesterol." I bit my tongue and accepted these small changes. After all, they were guests in my home, and I wanted to make them comfortable. But with each passing week, I felt increasingly like a guest in my own house, tiptoeing around Jessica's preferences, watching my home transform into something I barely recognized. Thomas seemed oblivious to the tension. Or worse, he noticed but chose to ignore it. Either way, my son, who once would have defended me against anyone, was now standing silently by as his wife gradually took over the home I had built. As weeks turned to months, Jessica's takeover of household decisions became more pronounced. What started as freshening up turned into complete redecorating. The comfortable, lived-in feel of my home was replaced by a staged, magazine-worthy aesthetic that felt cold and impersonal. "We need to modernize this place," Jessica would say, scrolling through home decor websites on her tablet. "Everything looks so dated." Those dated items were pieces of furniture Elaine and I had selected together, curtains she had sewn by hand, wall colors we had carefully chosen. Each change erased another piece of the home we had created. Thomas, who once spent weekends helping me maintain the house, now deferred all decisions to Jessica. "Whatever you think is best, honey," became his standard response. He seemed to have forgotten the sentimental value attached to the things being discarded or replaced. I tried to maintain some boundaries by designating my workshop in the garage and my small home office as personal spaces that should remain untouched. Jessica agreed with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, Aidan. Everyone needs their private areas." For a while, those boundaries held. Then came the incident with Elaine's gardening tools. My late wife had been an avid gardener, and I had carefully preserved her collection of hand tools in a special cabinet in the garage. I didn't use them often, but seeing them brought me comfort, a tangible connection to the woman I'd loved for so many years. One Saturday, I went to the garage to find the cabinet empty. In a panic, I searched everywhere before confronting Jessica, who was arranging flowers in the kitchen. "Oh, those old rusty things," she said casually. They were taking up valuable storage space, and they looked like tetanus waiting to happen. I put them out with the trash. My heart sank. Those were Elaine's. They were special to me. Jessica rolled her eyes. They were just gathering dust. You never even used them. When I expressed my hurt to Thomas later, he downplayed the incident. Mom's been gone for almost 30 years, Dad. Maybe it's time to let some things go. Jessica was just trying to help organize. That was the first major crack in my relationship with my son. The boy who had shared my grief, who had known how much his mother meant to me, was now suggesting I should just let go of one of the few tangible connections I had left to her. As the months stretched into a year, Jessica began referring to the house as our place, when speaking to friends on the phone or entertaining guests. She made renovation plans without consulting me, talking about knocking down walls and retiling bathrooms as if she owned the property. We're thinking about converting the dining room into a home office, she told her sister during a visit, completely ignoring the fact that the dining room table was where Elaine and I had shared thousands of meals, where Thomas had done his homework, where our family had gathered for every holiday. One afternoon, I overheard Jessica talking to her friend on the back porch, not realizing I was working in the garden nearby. It's challenging living with the old man, she said with a sigh. He's so set in his ways. But the house is perfect, and once we update it completely, it'll be worth a fortune. The location alone. Plus, it's not like he'll need all this space much longer. Her words stung like a physical slap. The old man. Not Aidan, not Thomas's father, not even Mr. Fletcher. Just the old man they had to deal with. Even more disturbing was the implication that they were waiting for me to, what? Die? Move to a nursing home so they could take over my house completely? Meanwhile, Thomas had found a new job at a smaller marketing firm. It paid less than his previous position, but combined with Jessica's income, they were doing okay financially. Yet there was never any mention of them moving out, of the temporary arrangement coming to an end. When I casually brought up the subject over dinner one night, asking if they'd started looking for their own place, Jessica quickly changed the subject. Later, I overheard them arguing in their bedroom. Your father is trying to push us out, Jessica hissed. He just asked a question, Thomas replied, though his tone lacked conviction. After everything we've done for him? This place was falling apart before we moved in. He should be grateful for the improvements. Improvements I hadn't asked for, paid for with money I provided since. They contributed nothing toward household expenses, despite my subtle hints that they might want to help with utilities at least. The dynamic in the house grew increasingly strained. Jessica became more dismissive of me, talking over me in conversations, making decisions about my home without even pretending to seek my input. Thomas, the son who once looked up to me, now treated me like I was slightly senile, explaining things slowly as if I couldn't understand basic concepts, always taking Jessica's side in any disagreement. Dad, Jessica is just trying to help, he would say whenever I raised concerns. You're not as young as you used to be. Some of these changes make things easier for you. I didn't need things to be easier. I was 71, not 91. I was still perfectly capable of maintaining my home, driving myself to appointments, managing my own affairs. But in Thomas and Jessica's narrative, I was becoming a burdensome old man who should be grateful for their presence. The betrayal cut deep. This was my son, my only child, the person I had sacrificed for, supported through every stage of life. And now he was treating me like an obligation, a problem to be managed rather than a father to be respected. As the temporary arrangement stretched into its second year, I began to realize with growing dread that Thomas and Jessica had no intention of leaving. They were settling in, taking over inch by inch, waiting for the day when they could claim my home as their own. And my son, the boy I had raised to be honest and straightforward, was complicit in this slow-motion home invasion. The situation took a darker turn when I discovered Jessica had been going through my personal papers. I kept important documents in my office desk drawer, things like insurance policies, my will, bank statements, and investment information. I noticed one day that papers were out of order, folders rearranged. At first, I thought perhaps I was becoming forgetful, but when it happened repeatedly, I set a simple trap. I placed a single strand of hair across the drawer before closing it. The next day, the hair was gone, confirming someone had opened the drawer. I confronted Jessica directly while Thomas was at work. "Have you been looking through my personal documents?" I asked as she scrolled through her phone at the kitchen counter. She looked up, momentarily startled before composing her features. I was just trying to help organize things. You really should have a better filing system, Aidan. What if something happened to you? Thomas would need to know where everything is. Those papers are private, I said firmly. If Thomas needs to know something, I'll tell him myself. Please respect my privacy going forward. Her eyes narrowed slightly. I think you're overreacting. We're family. There shouldn't be secrets. When Thomas came home that evening, Jessica was in tears. She'd spun a story about how I had attacked her for trying to help organize my chaotic paperwork, how I didn't trust her, how I was becoming paranoid in my old age. Thomas confronted me in the garage where I was trying to find solace in a small woodworking project. "Dad, what's this about you yelling at Jessica?" he demanded. "I didn't yell at anyone," I replied calmly. "I simply asked her not to go through my private documents without permission." Thomas ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "She was just trying to help. Why do you have to be so difficult? Do you know how much Jessica does around here? How ungrateful you sound right now." I set down my tools and looked at my son, really looked at him. When had he become this person who would automatically believe his wife over his father? Who would accuse me of being difficult for wanting basic privacy? "Thomas, this is still my house," I said quietly. "I'm entitled to keep my personal papers private." He scoffed. "Your house, right. Like you could maintain this place without our help. Face it, Dad, you need us more than we need you." His words hit like a physical blow. I turned back to my workbench, unable to look at him. "I think we're done with this conversation." After he left, I sat alone in my workshop, turning his words over in my mind. "You need us more than we need you." Was that really how my son saw our relationship now? As a transaction where I was the dependent party. The incidents multiplied after that confrontation. Jessica began referring to the house as hers, not just to friends but to service people and delivery drivers. "Yes, you can leave it on the porch. It's my house," I overheard her telling a package courier. They started inviting friends over for dinner parties without even informing me beforehand. I would come home from my weekly poker game with friends to find my living room full of strangers, my kitchen taken over for elaborate meal preparation. "Oh, Aidan," Jessica would say with fake surprise, "I thought you'd be out later. We're just having a few friends over. You're welcome to join us, unless you're too tired." The dismissal was clear in her tone. This was her social gathering in what she now considered her home. I was the intruder. The final straw with my personal possessions came when I discovered someone had been using my woodworking tools. I kept a set of high-quality tools that I'd collected over decades in my workshop. They were properly maintained, carefully stored, some passed down from my own father. One Saturday, I found my favorite handplane had been used and improperly cleaned, leaving it susceptible to rust. Several chisels were out of place, one with a chipped edge. My lathe had wood shavings around it, though I hadn't used it in weeks. When I asked Thomas about it, he admitted he had borrowed the tools to help a friend build a deck. "You should have asked," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Some of these tools are irreplaceable, and they've been damaged." "It's not a big deal, Dad," he replied dismissively. "I'll replace anything that's broken. That's not the point. These are my personal possessions. You wouldn't want me going through your things without asking." He laughed. "What things?" "Everything I own is in boxes in the garage because Jessica needed the closet space." The comment revealed more than he probably intended about the power dynamic in his marriage, but I let it pass. The workshop incident was minor compared to what happened the following week. I had gone to visit Frank, my oldest friend, for a 2-day fishing trip. When I returned, my workshop had been completely reorganized. Power tools were moved, shelving rearranged. My carefully sorted bins of screws, nails, and hardware had been consolidated into generic plastic containers with handwritten labels. Jessica had renovated my personal space without asking. "Surprise," she said when I stood staring at the transformed workshop. "I know you're particular about your space, but it was so cluttered. Now everything has a proper place." I've been watching home organization shows, and they say a cluttered space leads to a cluttered mind. My space hadn't been cluttered. It had been organized in a way that made sense to me, arranged for my workflow, for the projects I enjoyed in my retirement. When I expressed my anger at the invasion, Thomas defended his wife once again. "She spent 2 whole days on this, Dad. She was just trying to make improvements. You could at least say, "Thank you." I looked at my son, this stranger wearing Thomas's face, and felt something break inside me. Thank you? For rearranging my personal workspace without permission? For disrespecting my boundaries repeatedly? What should I be grateful for exactly? Thomas's face hardened. For everything we do around here. For the cooking, the cleaning, the yard work, the updates to this outdated house. We've made this place livable again. I never asked for any of that, I replied quietly. This was my home, arranged the way I wanted it, filled with memories of your mother, of our family. And piece by piece, those memories are being erased. Mom's been dead for 30 years, Thomas exploded. It's time to move on. Jessica is family now, and she deserves to feel comfortable in her own home. There it was again. Her own home. As if my house now belonged to Jessica. As if I was the guest who should be grateful for their generosity in allowing me to stay. I felt increasingly isolated in what had once been my sanctuary. The home I had built with my own hands, where I had raised my son, loved my wife, created thousands of happy memories, was being systematically stripped of everything that made it mine. The final blow came when I overheard Jessica on the phone with her mother, discussing my future. "We're looking into assisted living options," she said in a hushed tone from the kitchen. "Nothing immediate, but it's good to be prepared. The market is hot right now, and once we own the house outright, we can either sell for a great profit or renovate completely." I stood frozen in the hallway, her words echoing in my head. Once we own the house outright, as if my death or removal was just a matter of logistics, a hurdle to overcome before they could claim their prize. Later that week, I discovered Jessica had told several neighbors that she and Thomas had inherited the house from me, as if I was already gone. "Your daughter-in-law mentioned you've signed the house over to them," my neighbor Ed mentioned when we were both checking mail at the curb. "That's mighty generous of you." I corrected him, of course, but the damage was done. Jessica was laying groundwork, creating a narrative where the house was already effectively theirs. And my son, the boy I had taught to value honesty above all else, was allowing it to happen. The night everything changed began like any other. Jessica was making dinner, something she insisted on doing, though I would have been happy to cook for myself as I had for years. I sat at the kitchen table, attempting to read the newspaper while she clattered around with pots and pans, making far more noise than necessary. Thomas arrived home from work, kissed Jessica, and barely nodded in my direction before heading to the refrigerator for a beer. The subtle dismissal stung, but I'd grown accustomed to being treated like furniture in my own home. When dinner was served, I looked down at my plate with concern. Jessica had prepared shrimp scampi, loaded with garlic and shellfish. "Is there something else I could eat?" I asked politely. "I'm allergic to shellfish. Even a mild exposure gives me hives." Jessica's eyes widened in what seemed like manufactured surprise. "Oh, I completely forgot. How silly of me." The thing was, she hadn't forgotten. 6 months earlier, we'd had a conversation specifically about food allergies when she was planning a dinner party. I had mentioned my shellfish allergy quite clearly, and she had made a point of telling guests about it. This wasn't a slip of memory. "Did you really forget, Jessica?" I asked quietly. "Or was this deliberate?" The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Jessica's face transformed instantly, eyes filling with tears on command. "How could you accuse me of something so horrible?" she gasped, looking to Thomas for support. "I would never deliberately put your health at risk. I've been so busy taking care of this house, working full-time, trying to make everyone happy. I made one mistake, and you accuse me of trying to harm you?" Thomas immediately jumped to her defense, putting his arm around her shoulders as she dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. "Dad, what the hell? You can't just accuse Jessica of trying to poison you. What's wrong with you?" I set down my fork. I never said poison. But Jessica and I specifically discussed my shellfish allergy in detail just a few months ago. It seems odd she would forget something that important. "Are you calling my wife a liar?" Thomas demanded, his voice rising. Jessica sniffled dramatically. "I've tried so hard to make this work, Thomas. But your father has been criticizing me from day one. Nothing I do is ever good enough for him." This was a complete inversion of reality. I had swallowed my objections to countless changes, intrusions, and disrespect. I had watched silently as my home was transformed, my possessions rearranged or discarded, my privacy violated repeatedly. But in Jessica's narrative, she was the victim of my unreasonable demands. "That's not true," I said, struggling to keep my voice calm. "I've accepted many changes to my home to accommodate you both. All I've asked for is basic respect and consideration." Jessica's tears dried up instantly, her expression hardening. "Respect? You want to talk about respect? We put our lives on hold to move in here and take care of you. We cook, clean, maintain this outdated house, and all you do is complain and cling to the past." "I never asked you to take care of me," I replied. "This was supposed to be a temporary arrangement to help you both financially. I'm perfectly capable of caring for myself and my home." "Are you?" Jessica challenged, her voice taking on a nasty edge. "Because from what I can see, you're a lonely old man who can't accept that times change. This house was falling apart before we got here. You were living in the past, surrounded by ghosts." Thomas slammed his hand on the table. "That's enough, both of you." I looked at my son, hoping to see some recognition of how inappropriate Jessica's comments were. Instead, he was glaring at me as if I was the one at fault. "Jessica has done nothing but try to help," he continued, his voice shaking with anger. "She's made this place a real home again, and all you do is find fault and make accusations." "Thomas," I said quietly, "this was already a real home. My home, the home I built for our family." "Well, it's our family home now," Jessica interjected, "and frankly, we've been discussing whether this arrangement is still working. Maybe it would be better for everyone if you considered other living options. There's a very nice retirement community in Lancaster." The audacity took my breath away. They were suggesting I should leave my own house so they could take it over completely. "I'm not going anywhere," I said firmly. "This is my house. I built it. I paid for it. My name is on the deed and the mortgage that was paid off 20 years ago." "Dad, no one's saying it's not technically your house," Thomas said in that condescending tone he'd adopted lately. "But you need to be realistic about your future. You're not getting any younger. This place is too big for you to maintain alone." "I'm not alone," I reminded him. "I have friends. I have a community. I was doing just fine before you two moved in." Jessica made a dismissive sound. "Please." The garden was overgrown, the gutters were full of leaves, and half the appliances barely worked. "You need our help whether you want to admit it or not." The conversation was spiraling out of control. I took a deep breath, trying to dial back the tension. "Look, I appreciate that you've both contributed to the household," I said carefully. "But this is still my home, and I would like my preferences and boundaries to be respected." Jessica rolled her eyes. "Here we go again with the boundaries. We're family, Aidan. Family doesn't have boundaries." "All relationships have boundaries," I countered. "Even family ones, especially family ones." "That's your problem," she snapped. "You're so rigid, so stuck in the past. No wonder Thomas never brings friends around. It's embarrassing having to explain his stubborn old father who can't adapt to change." Something about her tone, the casual cruelty of her words, finally ignited my temper. "I've adapted to plenty of change," I said, my voice hardening. "I adapted when my wife died, and I had to raise Thomas alone. I adapted when my son grew up and moved out. I adapted when he brought home a wife who has systematically taken over my home and tried to erase all traces of our family history. What I won't adapt to is being treated like an unwelcome guest in the house I built with my own hands." Jessica's face flushed with anger. "You ungrateful old man, after everything we've done for you." "Jessica," I said calmly, looking her directly in the eye, "you haven't done anything for me that I asked for or needed. What you've done is take advantage of my generosity and manipulate my son into thinking this house is somehow yours." That was when Thomas exploded. He stood up so violently his chair crashed to the floor behind him. "Don't you dare argue with my wife in her house," he screamed, his face contorted with rage I had never seen before. The room fell completely silent. The words hung in the air between us, impossible to take back or ignore. Her house, my son, the boy I had raised alone after his mother died, the child I had sacrificed everything for, had just claimed that my home belonged to his wife. I felt something shift inside me, a tectonic plate of emotion moving to reveal a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. In that moment, looking at Thomas's angry face and Jessica's smug expression, I realized this situation was beyond repair. The son I knew was gone, replaced by this angry stranger who had forgotten everything I had taught him about respect, gratitude, and integrity. Thomas must have seen something change in my expression because he immediately tried to backtrack. I didn't mean. Dad, you know what I meant. We all live here. It's all of our house. But the damage was done. The truth had been revealed in that moment of uncontrolled anger. In Thomas's mind, in Jessica's reality, this was now their house. I was just an inconvenient obstacle to full ownership. Without a word, I stood up from the table, went to my bedroom, and packed an overnight bag. Thomas followed me, still trying to explain away his outburst. Dad, come on, don't be dramatic. I misspoke. You're taking this way too seriously. I looked at my son, this man I no longer recognized, and felt a profound sadness mixed with resolve. I'm going to stay with Frank tonight, I said quietly. I need some space to think. Dad, please, Thomas began, but I held up my hand. Not now, Thomas. I'll talk to you tomorrow. I walked out of my house that night feeling like a stranger in my own life. The home I had built, the son I had raised, the peaceful retirement I had planned, all seemed to be slipping through my fingers. But as I drove to Frank's house, a new determination began to form. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Frank opened his door, with a concerned expression. We'd been friends since high school, worked construction jobs together before starting our separate businesses, supported each other through marriages, parenthood, and widowhood. If anyone would understand my situation, it was Frank. Aidan, what's going on? You look like hell. I collapsed into his living room chair and poured out the whole story, from Thomas and Jessica moving in temporarily to the slow takeover of my home, culminating in my son's outburst claiming the house belonged to his wife. Frank listened without interrupting, his weathered face growing increasingly troubled. When I finished, he shook his head slowly. Damn, Aidan, that's some serious disrespect from your own flesh and blood. I don't know what to do, I admitted. That's my house. I built it with these hands. Every corner of it holds memories of Elaine, of raising Thomas. But now I feel like an intruder in my own home. Frank poured us each a finger of bourbon and sat across from me. What do you want to happen? Honestly? I considered the question carefully. I want my house back. I want Thomas and Jessica to move out and find their own place like adults. I want my son to remember who he is and who I am. Then you need to take action, Frank said firmly. Stop accepting this treatment. It's your house, your name on the deed. You have all the power here, but you've been giving it away piece by piece. He was right. In my desire to help my son, to avoid conflict, to not be the difficult father-in-law, I had allowed boundaries to be trampled, disrespect to flourish, and my own needs to be dismissed. What would you do? I asked. Frank didn't hesitate. I'd talk to a lawyer first thing tomorrow, confirm your legal rights, then change the locks while they're at work. They want to treat you like a guest? Show them who the real guest is. The suggestion was shocking in its directness, but also strangely liberating. This was my house. I didn't need permission to reclaim it. Isn't that extreme? I asked, though a part of me was already warming to the idea. What's extreme is your son and his wife trying to push you out of your own home, Frank countered. Sometimes you need to draw a hard line to get respect. Remember when we were starting out in construction? The only way to get those subcontractors to take us seriously was to stand firm, even when it was uncomfortable. I spent a restless night on Frank's guest bed, turning the situation over in my mind. By morning, I had made my decision. I would reclaim what was rightfully mine. My first stop was to see Alan Brockman, an attorney I'd known for years. He confirmed what I already knew. The house was legally mine. My name was on the deed. I had never signed any documents transferring ownership. Thomas and Jessica were essentially tenants, and since they didn't have a lease and paid no rent, I had every right to ask them to leave. Technically, you could give them 30 days' notice, Alan advised, but given the circumstances, a more immediate approach might be necessary. They have no legal claim to your property. Armed with this confirmation, I formulated a plan. I called 2 more friends from my poker group, retired guys like me who had time on their hands and strong moral compasses. They agreed to help without hesitation. I waited until I was certain both Thomas and Jessica had left for work. Thomas's car was gone by 8:30 each morning, and Jessica usually left by 9. At 10 o'clock, I returned to my house with Frank and my other friends, Bob and Gary. My first call was to a locksmith who came recommended by Alan. The man arrived promptly and changed every lock in the house within an hour. I paid him generously for the quick work. While the locksmith was working, my friends and I got busy. We carefully moved Jessica's decorations that had replaced family photos back to their bedroom. We found the boxes of my late wife's items that had been relegated to the garage and brought them back into the house. I reclaimed my kitchen, putting my cast-iron skillets back on the stove, my coffee and mug back in their rightful places. The most difficult task was packing Thomas and Jessica's belongings. I didn't want to seem vindictive or petty, so we were careful and respectful. Clothes were folded neatly into suitcases we found in their closet. Personal items were wrapped in paper and placed in boxes. Everything was labeled clearly and stored in the garage where they could access them easily. By 3 o'clock, the house was transformed back into my home. Family photos were restored to the walls, furniture returned to the arrangements I preferred, and my friends and I sat in the living room waiting for the inevitable confrontation. It came just after 5:30. I heard a key in the lock, then confusion as it failed to turn, then pounding on the door. "Dad, the key isn't working," Thomas called. I walked calmly to the door and opened it, standing in the doorway rather than inviting him in. Thomas looked confused, Jessica annoyed behind him. "What's going on with the lock?" Thomas asked. "Is something broken?" "The locks have been changed," I said simply. Thomas's confusion deepened. "Changed? Why would you change the locks without telling us?" Jessica tried to push past me into the house, but I stood firm. "I need to come in and start dinner," she said impatiently. "No, Jessica, you don't," I replied. "You and Thomas won't be staying here anymore." Thomas's face flushed with anger. "What are you talking about? This is our home." "No, Thomas. This is my home. My name is on the deed. I built it with my own hands. And after your outburst last night, I've decided it's time for you both to find your own place." Jessica's expression transformed from annoyance to shock. "You can't be serious. You're putting us out? Where are we supposed to go?" "That's for you to figure out," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil in my heart. "You're both adults with jobs. There are apartments available. Hotels for temporary stays." Thomas's anger was building visibly. "This is insane. You can't just change the locks and kick us out. We've been living here for 2 years. At my invitation, I reminded him, an invitation that has been increasingly abused. But if you need legal clarification, I handed Thomas the letter Alan had prepared, outlining my rights as the homeowner and their lack of legal claim to the property. Thomas scanned the document, his face paling slightly. Jessica peered over his shoulder, her expression hardening as she realized this wasn't a bluff. "You're really doing this?" Thomas asked, his voice quieter now. "Throwing your own son out on the street?" "I'm asking my adult son and his wife to find their own home, just as I did at their age," I corrected. "You have 1 hour to collect essential items from the garage where I've packed your belongings. The rest can be picked up tomorrow between noon and 5. Jessica's shock had transformed into a full meltdown. "You can't do this to us," she shrieked, drawing attention from neighbors. "This is our house, too. We've put money into it, invested time, made improvements. Without my permission or request," I noted calmly. "And you've contributed exactly $0 toward mortgage, property taxes, or utilities during your stay." Thomas's anger seemed to crumble, replaced by a desperate negotiation. "Dad, please. We need time to find a place. At least give us a few weeks." "You've had 2 years," I replied. "What was supposed to be a temporary arrangement has turned into an attempt to take over my home. I heard Jessica on the phone discussing assisted living options for me so you could have the house to yourselves. I know she's been telling neighbors you've inherited the property." Jessica's face flushed with guilt, confirming my accusations. Thomas looked at her with new uncertainty, perhaps realizing for the first time how calculated his wife's actions had been. "Your things are packed in the garage," I continued. "Frank, Bob, and Gary helped me. Everything was handled with care." As if on cue, my 3 friends appeared behind me, a united front of support. Jessica's hysterics escalated at the sight of witnesses to her humiliation. "This is elder abuse," she cried out to no one in particular. "He's not in his right mind. Thomas, call the police." "The police will simply confirm what my attorney already has," I said steadily. "This is my property. You have no legal right to be here without my permission, which has been revoked." Thomas seemed torn between his wife's hysteria and the undeniable legal reality. "Can I at least get some of our things?" he asked, his voice smaller now. 1 hour, I repeated. Essential items only, the rest tomorrow. I stepped aside to allow Thomas into the garage, but when Jessica tried to follow, I blocked her path. Thomas can gather your things, I said. You can wait on the porch. How dare you? She spat. After everything I've done for you, you've done nothing for me that I wanted or asked for, I replied quietly. You've tried to erase my late wife from this home, manipulated my son, and plotted to take my property. The only thing you've given me is clarity about who you really are. Jessica's face contorted with rage, but with 3 witnesses behind me, she was powerless to do anything but fume on the porch, while Thomas gathered their immediate necessities. The power dynamic had completely reversed. Thomas, who just yesterday had screamed at me not to argue with his wife in her house, was now hastily shoving toiletries and clothes into a duffel bag, occasionally throwing pleading glances my way. Jessica, who had been so confidently planning to take over my home, was reduced to angry tears on the porch, her schemes exposed and defeated. As they drove away an hour later, car packed with hastily gathered possessions, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Sadness for the breakdown of my relationship with my son, anger at the betrayal, but predominantly a powerful sense of reclaiming my dignity and my home. Frank clapped me on the shoulder as we watched their car disappear down the street. You did the right thing, Aidan. Hard but right. I nodded, looking at the house I had built, now truly mine again. Yes, I did. The texts and calls started within an hour of Thomas and Jessica leaving. First came angry messages from Jessica, accusing me of cruelty, of destroying their lives, of being a selfish old man who would die alone. I deleted these without responding. Thomas's messages were more complicated, alternating between apologies and accusations. I'm sorry about what I said, Dad. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. Then, an hour later, you could have given us some warning. We have nowhere to go tonight. And later still, Jessica is devastated. How could you humiliate us like this in front of the neighbors? I responded only once, with a simple text. You're both adults with jobs and savings. I'm sure you'll land on your feet. The calls from extended family started that evening. Jessica had apparently been busy on the phone, spreading her version of events. My sister-in-law Carol called, concerned about what she'd heard. Jessica says you've had some kind of breakdown, she said cautiously. That you threw them out without warning because of a minor disagreement. I explained the reality of the situation, the 2 years of boundary violations, the gradual takeover of my home, Thomas's outburst claiming it was Jessica's house, and Jessica's plans to put me in assisted living. Carol was quiet for a moment. That doesn't sound like the Thomas I know. It's not the Thomas I raised, I agreed, but it's who he's become under Jessica's influence. After hearing the full story, Carol's perspective shifted. You did what you had to do, Aidan. I'm sorry it came to this. Not everyone was as understanding. Jessica's parents called to berate me, having heard only their daughter's version of events where she and Thomas had been selflessly caring for an increasingly unstable old man who had suddenly turned on them without provocation. She gave up her beautiful apartment to help you, Jessica's mother shouted. She put her career on hold to cook and clean for you. Jessica never cooked anything I asked for, or cleaned anything I couldn't manage myself, I replied calmly. And her career as an administrative assistant continued uninterrupted while she lived rent-free in my home. The conversation deteriorated from there, ending with Jessica's father threatening vague legal action that both he and I knew had no basis. I hung up feeling exhausted but resolute. That first night alone in my reclaimed home was surprisingly peaceful. I slept better than I had in months, no longer tensing at every sound, no longer feeling like an intruder in my own space. In the morning, I made my own coffee exactly how I liked it, sat in my favorite chair with the newspaper, and felt the simple joy of autonomy. Throughout the day, the calls continued. Mutual friends checking in, some supportive, others questioning my decision. A few suggested I was being too harsh, that family should stick together, that I should have found a compromise. What compromise would you suggest? I asked one well-meaning friend. Should I have given them half my house? A wing to call their own? Or maybe I should have moved into the garage while they took over completely. The friend had no answer to that. Frank, Bob, and Gary came over that evening for moral support when Thomas and Jessica were scheduled to collect the rest of their belongings. I was grateful for their presence, as a rented truck pulled into my driveway precisely at noon. Thomas approached the door alone, Jessica conspicuously remaining in the passenger seat of their car, arms crossed, face set in a scowl. "We're here for our things," Thomas said stiffly. I nodded. "Everything's in the garage, packed and labeled." Thomas glanced at Frank and the others. "Did you have to bring an audience?" "They're here as friends, not an audience," I replied. "And given how things ended yesterday, I thought it wise to have witnesses." Thomas's jaw tightened, but he nodded shortly and began the process of loading their belongings. Jessica never left the car, though I could feel the heat of her glare through the windshield. As Thomas was loading the last few boxes, he paused near me. "Dad, I think we need to talk about this. It doesn't have to be this way." "What way did you expect it to be, Thomas?" I asked quietly. "Did you think you could call my house your wife's property and there would be no consequences?" He had the grace to look ashamed. I misspoke in the heat of the moment. "You know I didn't mean it literally." "I think you did," I countered. "I think you and Jessica have been planning to take over this house for a while now." The comments about assisted living, telling neighbors you've inherited the property, systematically erasing every trace of your mother from this home. It was all leading somewhere, Thomas. He couldn't meet my eyes. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" I challenged. "Explain it to me. Help me understand how my son could forget whose house he was living in, forget the respect he owes the father who raised him alone, forget everything I taught him about integrity and honesty." Thomas had no answer. After a long silence, he simply said, "We found a month-to-month rental. It's not great, but it'll do until we figure things out." "I'm glad to hear that," I said sincerely. "You're both capable adults. You'll be fine." As he turned to leave, Thomas hesitated, then asked, "Is this really it? Are we just done as family?" The question hit me hard. Despite everything, this was still my son, my only child. "I don't know, Thomas. That might depend on whether you can see this situation clearly someday, without Jessica's influence coloring everything." He flinched slightly at that. "She's my wife, Dad." "And I'm your father," I reminded him. "The man who raised you alone after your mother died, who paid for your education, who welcomed you into his home when you needed help. Those things used to mean something to you." Thomas had no response to that. He finished loading the truck in silence and left without another goodbye. The aftermath in the community was mixed. Some neighbors who had witnessed Jessica's meltdown on my front lawn sought me out to express support. Mrs. Abernathy from across the street brought over a casserole and said she'd never liked that woman anyway. "Too full of herself," Mrs. Abernathy sniffed, "always talking about her vision for your house as if she owned the place." Other neighbors were less supportive, influenced by Jessica's version of events, where I was the villain who had cruelly evicted my son and his wife without warning or cause. I heard whispers at the grocery store, saw sidelong glances at church. It stung, but I stood firm in the knowledge that I had done what was necessary. A month after the confrontation, I received a surprising text from Thomas asking if we could meet for coffee without Jessica. I agreed, suggesting a cafe halfway between my house and their rental. Thomas looked tired when he arrived, with new lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He ordered black coffee and sat across from me, hands wrapped around the mug as if seeking warmth. "How are you?" I asked, genuinely concerned despite everything. "Managing," he replied. "The rental's okay, smaller than we're used to. Jessica hates it." I nodded but offered no sympathy. They'd had 2 years of free housing in my home. A smaller rental was simply the reality of living within their means. "How about you?" Thomas asked. "Are you doing all right in the house alone?" "I'm fine," I said. "The house is mine again. I've put back the family photos, restored your mother's things to their proper places. It feels like home again." Thomas winced slightly at the implication. "Dad, I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about the things I said and did." "And?" I prompted when he fell silent. "And I'm sorry," he said finally. "I was wrong to yell at you like that, wrong to claim the house was Jessica's. I got caught up in trying to keep peace between you two, and somehow I lost sight of whose house it actually was. It was a start, an acknowledgement of the core issue, but it felt incomplete. Do you understand why I had to ask you both to leave?" Thomas nodded slowly. "I think so. We overstepped. Jessica especially. She got comfortable there, started treating it like our permanent home, and I enabled that. You did more than enable it, I pointed out. You actively participated in pushing me out of my own home. He had the decency to look ashamed. I never saw it that way at the time, but looking back, yeah, I guess we did. We talked for nearly 2 hours, the longest, most honest conversation we'd had in years. Thomas admitted that Jessica had indeed been making plans for the house, talking about renovations they'd do once it was theirs. He acknowledged that he'd lost perspective, forgotten the values I'd raised him with. Jessica and I are struggling, he confessed near the end of our conversation. Not just financially, but in our marriage. She blames me for not standing up to you, for losing our comfortable living situation. She's talking about moving back to her parents in Ohio. I felt a surge of mixed emotions. Sadness for my son's pain, but also a glimmer of hope that he might finally see his wife's true character. I'm sorry you're going through that, Thomas, truly. But maybe this is an opportunity for clarity. He looked up sharply. What do you mean? Just that sometimes we can't see a situation clearly until we're forced to step back from it, I said carefully. Living in my house, under Jessica's influence, you lost sight of who you are, of the values that used to guide you. Maybe this separation, difficult as it is, will help you find yourself again. Thomas didn't respond directly to that, but something in his expression suggested the words had landed. As we parted, he hugged me briefly, the first physical contact we'd had in months. I'm going to work on things, Dad, he promised. On myself, mainly. I've lost my way somehow. You know where to find me when you're ready, I told him, meaning it despite the hurt that still lingered. 2 weeks later, Thomas called to tell me Jessica had indeed left for Ohio, asking for a separation. He sounded both devastated and relieved, a man emerging from a fog to find the landscape utterly changed. I don't know what happens next, he admitted. But I think you were right about a lot of things, Dad. I'm seeing clearer now. It was a bittersweet victory. I had reclaimed my home, but potentially at the cost of my son's marriage. Yet as the weeks turned to months, I began to see the Thomas I had raised re-emerging from the shadow of Jessica's influence. He called more regularly, visited occasionally for brief, increasingly comfortable conversations. The path to reconciliation would be long and uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt hopeful about our relationship. My son was finding his way back to himself, and perhaps eventually back to me. 6 months have passed since I changed the locks on my home and reclaimed what was rightfully mine. The house feels like my sanctuary again, filled with memories of Elaine, of raising Thomas, of the life we built together as a family. The photos are back on the walls, the furniture arranged the way I prefer, my workshop restored to its proper order. The peace I've found in standing up for myself has been profound, though it came at a significant cost. For weeks after the confrontation, I questioned my decision, wondered if I had been too harsh, too absolute in my approach. But with time and reflection, I've come to believe it was necessary. Sometimes the hardest boundaries are the ones we most need to establish. 3 months after Jessica left for Ohio, Thomas called to tell me they were officially divorcing. She wanted me to sue you for the house, he admitted with a hollow laugh. Said we had a case for adverse possession or something. When I refused, she said I wasn't the man she married. Maybe that's a good thing, I suggested gently. The man she married was losing himself. Thomas has been slowly rebuilding his life as a single man again. He found a small apartment closer to his work, started therapy to understand how he had strayed so far from his values, reconnected with old friends Jessica had discouraged him from seeing. The process hasn't been easy for him, but I see glimmers of the son I raised emerging from the experience, stronger and wiser for having faced this difficult truth. Our relationship is healing too, though the scars remain. Thomas visits for dinner every other Sunday now, a tradition we're carefully rebuilding. We talk more openly than we have in years. He's apologized multiple times for his behavior, each apology more specific and genuine than the last, as his understanding of what happened deepens. I still can't believe I screamed that the house was hers, he said during a recent visit, shaking his head in disbelief. It's like I was under some kind of spell. Love can be like that sometimes, I said. It can blind us to reality, make us compromise parts of ourselves we never thought we'd surrender. My feelings about the whole situation remain complex. There's vindication, certainly, in having stood my ground and reclaimed my home. There's sadness for the pain Thomas has experienced in this process of awakening. There's lingering hurt at the betrayal, at how quickly my son had forgotten everything I'd sacrificed for him. But increasingly, there's also forgiveness. Not the easy kind that comes with forgetting, but the harder, more meaningful forgiveness that acknowledges the wrong done while choosing to move forward anyway. Thomas betrayed me, hurt me deeply, but he's still my son, my only child. The love remains, even if it's now tempered with a more clear-eyed understanding of his capacity for mistake. This experience has taught me profound lessons about boundaries and respect. For too long, I accepted disrespect in my own home out of a misguided desire to help, to avoid conflict, to be the accommodating father and father-in-law. I've learned that genuine respect isn't something you can beg for or negotiate. It must be required as the price of admission to your life. I've also learned about the limits of what we should tolerate, even from family. Blood relation isn't a blank check to treat someone poorly. Love doesn't mean accepting mistreatment. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do, both for ourselves and for the other person, is to draw a hard line and say, no further. The support of friends through this ordeal has been invaluable. Frank, Bob, Gary, and others rallied around me, offering practical help and emotional support when I needed it most. They reminded me that family isn't just about blood relations, but about who shows up for you when things get difficult. I've deepened these friendships in the months since, investing more time and energy in these relationships that prove their worth when tested. I've made changes to the house too, small adjustments that make it truly mine again. I've set up Elaine's gardening tools in a special display case in the sunroom, a tribute to her memory. I've converted the guest room into a reading nook, something I always wanted but never prioritized when thinking about potential visitors. I'm living for myself now, arranging my home for my comfort and pleasure rather than anyone else's expectations. Thomas asks occasionally if I get lonely in the house alone. The truth is, I don't. I have my friends, my volunteer work at the Veterans Center, my woodworking projects. I have peace and autonomy. After 2 years of feeling like an unwelcome guest in my own home, the solitude is refreshing rather than isolating. As for Thomas's future, I'm cautiously hopeful. The divorce will be finalized soon, and he seems committed to understanding how he lost himself in his relationship with Jessica. He's talking about taking some woodworking classes, reconnecting with that part of our shared past. Small steps toward rebuilding not just our relationship but his sense of self. The wisdom I've gained through this experience boils down to something surprisingly simple. Standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. We teach people how to treat us by what we allow, what we tolerate, what we accept. By reclaiming my home and my dignity, I taught my son an important lesson about respect that will serve him well in future relationships. If there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this. It's never too late to draw a line, to reclaim your power, to demand the respect you deserve. Age doesn't diminish your right to dignity. Being family doesn't entitle anyone to mistreat you. Your home, your boundaries, your life belongs to you alone. The house I built with these hands is truly mine again. The peace I've found in standing firm is its own reward. And the relationship I'm rebuilding with my son, though altered and still healing, feels more authentic than what we had before. There's honesty between us now, a recognition of past mistakes, and a commitment to doing better. What about you? Have you ever had to stand up to family members who crossed your boundaries? How did you handle it, and what did you learn? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who might need encouragement to stand their ground. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, it's your life, your rules, your boundaries. Never let anyone tell you otherwise.